I bust out the blades right after I start seeing the fish transition from jig and shiner, vertical jig, anytime where the fish start to get more spread out on where we were finding them. Typically the jig bite, fish are concentrated, you don't have to go too far to catch them. The whole purpose of spinners is to be able to cover water and pluck off fish because they just simply spread out a little bit. So that's going to be late May, early June is typically when we start to break out the spinners. And on warm years, sometimes we're running them right on opener. Never really stop using spinners. Late fall, we do more rigging with bigger minnows and kind of put away the spinners. But I'd have to say extreme late fall. I've had success with spinners pretty much all year round, if you're just talking about the summer months from spring to fall. Hooks on spinner rigs can get kind of funky because you've got super slow death, you've got octopus style, you've got Aberdeen hooks for minnows on spinner rigs. So it basically comes down to what the fish is keying in on as far as bait. Like you take Mille Lacs for instance, you're either usually going to be running a crawler or a minnow. And if you see a preference towards minnow, you're going to be running that longer Aberdeen hook just to get the minnow to run semi-straight on that spinner rig. So hooks is, in my opinion, it's due to the bait that the fish are telling you they're keyed in. And a lot of times when I'm just starting the spinner season, earlier on you'll see that spinner and a minnow works better than spinner and a crawler. Bait strategy, unless you know that you're going to a lake where you always catch them on crawlers, I bring minnows and crawlers. And I always have my artificials there, especially if you're just going through fish, and I see this a lot with my customers. We'll have 4 lines out and they're just whacking fish one after another. I will grab an impulse crawler or an impulse leech and substitute that live bait and put it on there and see if the catch rate continues. And that will keep me from having to, instead of spending 5 minutes netting the fish, unhooking it, maybe getting a picture or two, and then rebaiting, versus netting the fish, unhooking it, putting it back, giving it to the customer. It just shaves off a lot of bait time. So definitely always have my impulse stuff with me, especially if you're going to the northern lakes like Lake of the Woods. Minnows, Mille Lacs, I like fatheads. I do like shiners down there too. They do get a little harder to get. Spinners and minnows on Winnie. I like shiners, I like the spot tail shiners on Winnie and Leech. Lake of the Woods, I like their emerald shiners. The lake up there is full of shiners. But that being said, when we do spinners on Upper Red Lake, which is a real simple spinner program, 3-foot spinner, 1/4 ounce weight, 0.8 to 1 mile an hour in reverse, in 3 to 8 feet, 3 to 10 feet, that is, if you can get your hands on emeralds, it can make a difference, but sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, but definitely Lake of the Woods and Upper Red Lake, if you can get your hand on emeralds, run them up there. Mille Lacs Lake, spot tails, but typically on Mille Lacs, the water warms so quick that we transition into crawlers really, really quick. Sometimes that spinner and minnow bite is only a couple weeks long. Sometimes it lasts a month, but I haven't seen it last that long in a long time. Spinner rigs and blades are kind of like crankbaits to me. They all have a little bit different action. They all have a little bit different vibration. Some spin at extremely slow speeds. Some take over 1 mile an hour to start kicking around. And then they've got blades with rattles in them. The butterfly blade in particular, that is kind of a roundabout blade where you can run that at 1/4 mile an hour, which is an extremely slow speed. Run it all the way up to 1.5 miles an hour if you want. So that's a good all-around blade. Metal blades, I always start small before I start going up, especially on Mille Lacs. I see a lot of smaller blades work better. I remember one year in particular, it was 2010 or 2011, where I couldn't find any number 6, 5, and 6 blades in the bait shops, and I was ordering them online because it didn't matter how big I went on my spinner rigs, they were still just crushing them. The bigger the blade, the better. So blades for me, like I said, you'll see me changing out blades a lot. When you finally get it dialed in, then I'll tie up 4 or 5 spinner rigs with that combo and send them out. But blades are something I feel that every angler should have have a lot of. I mean, my spinner is about, my blade box is about this big. It's got little pins in it. I'm not sure the manufacturer. I picked it up online a few years ago, but it's got little posts in there, and every one of those posts has a different size, color, and it's well organized, so you can just simply flip it open, grab a blade, pop it on, and as long as you don't have to change bead color, you can get your blades dialed in very, very quickly. And by saying that, blades just aren't metal anymore. We have polycarbonate blades. We have a ton of artificial blades. We have just blades that are even straight up plastic now. So when you're at your local retailer, take a look around at the different blades, and 9 times out of 10, when you're trying something new, it'll only take 4 or 5 minutes to find out if it works. The other part, very, very few spinner blades do not catch fish. Most of them, because it's such a natural presentation, catch a lot of fish. Color selection on blades is golds, your natural colors, your golds, your silvers, your whites. Even one of the popular colors on Red Lake is white and gold. Those I always start natural, and if they're just getting, you know, smoked on gold, sometimes I'll add a gold and, you know, gold and copper, hammered gold, kind of run the gamut on the gold scheme. And then maybe I'll throw out a Fire Tiger combo and see if that might produce. And sometimes with playing with colors, you'll see, okay, well, I keep picking up pike or a non-target species on a different color, and that'll get you dialed back in. But definitely I always start with natural colors on blades. If your blade is this long, I like to have that many beads. And the reason is I like to have, when the blade lays down, I like the beads to be at the end of the blades or a little bit past it. Because I don't like that fish, if it comes up to grab it, having that blade flap him in the face. I really don't, I don't know, that's a personal preference. But the other thing is when a fish is behind that spinner and that's spinning, the inside of that blade, if it's a metal blade, is actually reflecting the color of the beads, is what's going on there. So bead color plays an important part. So for natural like gold, I will put maybe red, gold, gold, or I'll go 2 golds, 2 reds, or a silver, and kind of mix up the hues of the gold in the bead pattern. And then on Fire Tigers, let's say you have a chartreuse blade, then I'll go basically your Fire Tiger pattern on the beads all the way down. You know, your chartreuse, orange, green. And then for buggy ones, a purple and silver blade with purple and pink beads is another hot one. A solid pink blade with pink and white beads is another one. So it all depends. If we were going into a mayfly hatch, golds are good, purples are good, pinks are good, pink and whites are good, purple and whites. Purple, white, and gold is another really good odd combination that's really good. So when you get your blade dialed in, it doesn't hurt to dial in your beads as well, but just know, like, hey, if I'm rigging up some gold spinners, red, green, silver, and gold, those are all good colors to start with when you're building your spinner rig. Weight strategy, I kind of got to start at the top down on that. Deeper lakes, I'm using bottom bouncers or 3-way rigs. If I know I'm going to be pulling spinners on Mille Lacs, on the mud specifically, I will run a 3-way rig with a 2 to 4 ounce bell sinker with a longer snell, 6 to 8 foot spinner snell. But then if I'm fishing weeds, let's say I'm fishing in 10 to 15 feet, I will run a 1/2 to 5/8 inline weight with a 3 to 4 foot spinner. So the spinners and weights are kind of those things where if you're fishing snaggy stuff, your slick sticks, your bottom bouncers, those are the weights you want to be using when you're maintaining contact with the bottom and skipping it across. Especially if you're fishing really, really snaggy stuff, you don't want to be losing a lot of equipment. So I know some of the bottom bouncers and the slick sticks, they're a little bit more money, and the reason they are is they simply allow your lure to stay down without getting snagged up all the time and catching fish. So don't opt for the cheap weight all the time. There's a reason why, you know, they're a little bit bigger, and sometimes a little bit more colorful, and that's why they're going to attract the fish in with the color of the weight, and then it's going to see the spinner and hit it, and be 2 to 3 times more snag resistant on the R style and the slick stick. rigging in general with crawler, minnow, leech, on Mille Lacs in particular, I'm never using anything shorter than 8 feet. And at times we go all the way up to 16 feet. And that has to do with the water clarity on Mille Lacs. It's extremely clear. We're talking 16 feet at times. And you want to get that weight away from that lure and have that bait, especially leech or crawler, looking as natural as possible. And we've seen it before where guys have been out and we've been fishing the same general area and we're catching twice as many fish. It's because we're using a 10-foot leader, and this guy's it's his first time out on Mille Lacs, and he's using a 6-foot leader because he's from western Minnesota and a lot of lakes are stained. And by simply extending his leader length, he starts to catch fish. So that is generally the rule of thumb is the more stained water you have, the shorter you can go. I would never go shorter than 3 feet, and the clearer the water, the longer the leader. Mille Lacs being an extremely clear lake, you go to the extreme end of the spectrum on that. Now for spinners, it's kind of the same thing, but you got to remember there's a speed factor in there. So spinners, you're going like 0.8 to 1.5 miles an hour, so you're cruising through them faster. So on Mille Lacs, I use a 6 to 8 foot spinner rig. On Lake of the Woods, 3 to 5 feet. Winnie, 4 to 6 feet. Leech is one of those where I'm getting up there in my leader length from 6 to 8 feet again. So always play with your spinner, and it a lot of times doesn't have to do with the color of the spinner you're using. It has to do with getting that presentation away from the delivery system. Speed, I always fish everything as fast as it will possibly let me. I mean, if you guys knew what was going on in this video right now, you would laugh. Literally, we've got Matt in the front of the boat right now, and I'm playing with speed behind me while we're doing this video, and I've been bumping up my speed and slowing it down. He's towing a spinner right now. I started at 0.8, went up to 1.1. Now I'm cruising at 1.1, 1.2, and that's all I'm doing is messing with it. So I will always try to push those limits, but a good rule of thumb with spinners is 0.8 to 1.1, somewhere in that realm is always going to give you your perfect spin on the presentation. Open water trolling, 1.25 to 1.5, maybe even 1.6 miles an hour is right about right for open water spinners. And then when you're drifting spinners, 0.8, you go down the wave, it picks up to 1 mile an hour, then you go back to 0.8. That's about perfect for those too. So dial in your color, get a couple fish on that, then dial in your speed and kind of go from there. And then what I always do is push the limits. If I go a little faster and I don't catch fish, I know that, okay, that 0.9 miles an hour is where the fish need that spinner to be at. Line, fluorocarbon. I run fluorocarbon on 2 and braid on 2. And when I'm over structure, rocks, I like using braid because if it does get snagged, you can usually get it free real quick. And it telegraphs the bottom content right back, especially if you're using a slick stick. If you're using a slick stick and braid, it's like rubbing your rod tip on the bottom. I mean, that's how sensitive that is. A stainless steel rod that goes right into braid. It's almost like holding on to it and almost feeling electricity through it. That's how sensitive that is. And you don't have to use an expensive rod to get that telegraph back to your hand. Now the fluorocarbon, I like using that heavier fluorocarbon, 12 to 14 pound for clear bodies of water when the fish might be line shy and you might have to fish a little slow. So especially Mille Lacs, I'm using that 12 to 14 pounds. So stained water braid, clear water fluorocarbon. But again, I've been known to catch on some days just as many fish on braid on Mille Lacs with spinner rigs because it has more to do with the leader length away from the weight. Leader, that's another one where stained water, heavier leader, I'll go up to 12 to 14 pound on stained bodies of water and shorter. And on Mille Lacs, I'm using an 8 to 10 pound fluorocarbon leader on my spinners just because of the water clarity. And I think that has a lot to do with your presentation. You see a lot of guys are using 20 pound test and 3-foot spinners on Mille Lacs. That means your weight is like that far away from the spinner. That is a spooky presentation when the fish can see all that. You need to separate that out a little more. So definitely clear lakes, longer leader length, thinner line, stained water, shorten it up a little bit, and sometimes go a little bit faster as well. Rod and reel, Bait casters, again, I don't think you have to have like a $300 bait caster for pulling spinners. I prefer one, quite simply, with a flip and switch on it. That is a really nice feature to have, and I know a lot of guys, when they're gonna ask that question, they're gonna say a flip and switch. That allows you, when you let line out, to just let go and not have to thumb the line, especially when you're using heavy 2.5, 3s, and 4-ounce weights. It doesn't overrun on you. So bait caster setups, and they don't have to be big, because you're typically fishing bottom bouncers in 35 to, 25, 20 feet, somewhere in that realm. So you don't got to spool them all the way up to the top like bass fishermen do. You can put 100 yards on there and call it good. Now for drifting spinners, I prefer spinning gear, because you're using typically a 1/2 ounce, 5/8 ounce, sometimes 3/4 ounce. I like spinning gear because the leaders are usually shorter and you can just flop them out, and a lot of times those are drifting or running around with your Minn Kota, just pulling you around the edges of the structure. You don't want to use a bait caster in shallow water. It's going to take twice as long to get the line out. If you're using a 4-foot spinner rig and a 1/2 ounce weight with a crawler, you'd open the bail, flick it out 20 feet, and you're going to be right in that strike zone. Or just let it over the side of the boat when you hit bottom. If you keep hitting bottom, give it a couple cranks and just hold it there. And that's where the speed factor comes in. If you're with a bait caster, if you're trying to use one thing for everything, bait caster, you're going to be peeling it out because it's not going to want to go out with a half foot or 1/2 ounce of line, and it's just going to be really inconvenient. Versus spinning gear, if you have 3-4 people in the boat, you can literally unhook, bait them, bait 4 lines in less than 2 minutes and have them fishing. And that rod is going to be, it doesn't have to be a $300 rod for spinner fishing, because basically what it is it's a rod that is a medium action that just allows the fish to load on it. You're not detecting a bite, giving it a little bit and setting the hook on it. It allows it to load, and by the time it starts to load, you're going to feel it already and start leaning into the fish a little bit.